Hey guys, it's Crossroads here. I made some moves in my portfolio and I wanted to share those. Of course, last week I published a video on Palantir that I was selling some of my shares, not all my shares, but some for the first time since I've been a shareholder. I've sold, 5 or 10 here or there just to round out a trade before and bought those back shortly after. But this time I cut about 23% of my shares. And so, with that, and also with new funds coming into the market for myself, a pretty large chunk coming in at one time, I didn't want to sit really heavy in cash. So, I made some moves. Some of that's on the 24-hour market just before we opened the market, actually late last night, and some were today as well. So, let me run through that and just share a bit of my thought process on each of these. So, just in order of size, HIMS, of course, comes first. The exciting thing for HIMS is I just think it's a great play. We've talked about HIMS elsewhere. I have several videos on it as well. I'm convinced that they have much more of a moat than people expect. The personalization, the customization, it's very, very sticky. We're seeing very good things from their web traffic as well. There were some concerns last week by an analyst that were looking at credit card sales over a week, and they said, hey, these are a little bit weak for HIMS. They had some concerns. I think those concerns are probably overblown. Even without compounding revenue, HIMS is growing at 40% year over year, fantastic margins. And I almost think of them more as a data or a SaaS play than anything. They're not just simply a generic prescription fulfiller or something like that. So I bought a lot of shares on the 24-hour market on HIMS. I'll be buying a few more just to round out. I like nice round even numbers that I can sell covered calls against in the next day or two once some additional funds settle. Now, the second largest purchase that might actually shock you is GameStop. Now, I'm not buying the shares directly. I actually sold cash secured puts that may not end up filling. I believe it was for a 26, maybe it was a $27 strike. I'd have to look again. You might say, Roy, why do you hold GameStop, which I do right now? It's in my swing portfolio and willing portfolio. And why would I add more? Well, let me show you this. So GameStop is not a company I plan to hold long term. I'm not owning it for a squeeze. I'm not owning it for the memes or anything like that. But there's two reasons. So the first is really with that Trump coin and that Trump token that was issued by the president. Melania and other things too. It's very, very clear we're on a risk-on environment. Stocks like GameStop do very well when we're on a risk-on environment. The market is not appreciating that, and that's fine. If you look at GameStop, of course, their price to earnings ratio is abysmal. They were unprofitable a long time. They're just barely profitable right now, thanks to interest largely. So don't read too much into that. I'm not buying this because of the fundamentals or some grand vision or plan. But the reality is that a lot of their cap, they're at 12.2 billion in market cap, and you can see here, debt is a little bit less than half a billion. Cash and cash equivalents 4.62 billion. So we have an 8 on enterprise value. So they they have a lot of cash. Interest rates have gone down a little bit. They'll yield a little bit less, but they still have a massive amount of cash. If you look at the valuation as well, price to sales is going up, price to earnings is going down. That doesn't matter too much to me, but what really matters is that expense, and they're controlling revenue. Their costs are going well. Let me show you also what they're expecting for earnings. So earnings, you can see here on the revenue side, they've missed consistently. They may miss again. The market doesn't seem to care about that, but they tend to actually beat EPS. And I think that there's a good chance setting up that they will beat EPS again. Quarter four, they tend to do a little bit better anyway, just because of holiday sales. Revenue also reflects that. It also wouldn't shock me if they have a double or even a triple beat at this point. Anyway, this isn't just an earnings play. It's one that I'm swinging back and forth, that if those cash secure puts end up filling, then I'll just sell the other side of that with covered calls. The yields are very nice on that. But I'm not doing this play solely for the yields. That's one of the things, if you've not wheeled stocks before, make sure you research how to do that, figure out what strategy works well for you. But one rule that I have is I never will a stock simply for the premiums, because there are some stocks out there that have insane, amazing premiums that I would not ever want to get caught in my portfolio. But this, with the amount of cash, the lack of debt, and really just very, very cautious expectations when it comes into earnings, as well as a risk on environment, I think is a really nice setup simply for a trade. I don't plan to be in this long term, but I'm willing back and forth for the time being. And we'll see what happens into earnings. Not a long term position again. PayPal. I ended up buying some PayPal, this time only leaps. So it's one of two positions that I ended up buying options on. PayPal specifically is one of those plays I talk a lot about, and I think it's undervalued. Now you can look at it from a fundamental standpoint, and let me bring this here. It went down actually a good bit today, and I don't know exactly why. I looked at news, and there's a couple of potential reasons, but I think it's just trying to match a reason with the stock price, which is not always the case. But PayPal is set up very well as far as the ratios. Price to earnings is close to 20. It's a little bit under 20, so it's a little undervalued. Price to sales, if you compare it with peers, it's undervalued. And this is a year where I've talked about that it's really fintech spring. PayPal is one of those OGs of the fintech world. And I think that they're going to do very, very well under Alex Chris. There's new innovation. There's a new thrust, new drive. It wouldn't shock me if we see layoffs before the end of the year. I'm never celebrating layoffs because I've felt those before myself personally, myself and my wife. But it's probably needed on a name like PayPal, especially when AI is coming out. They can do individual employees can do a lot more with AI rather than just hiring a whole bunch more people. So it wouldn't surprise me if we see a lot of cost control built into guidance. Of course, continued buybacks help pump that EPS. They're expanding margins and they're launching new products left and right, including advertising, which I think will do quite well. And lastly, you may have noticed, maybe you haven't, there is a lot in the news about stablecoins. One of my predictions this year was that this is going to be the year of stablecoins, and you're going to see pay by stablecoin all over the place and pay by crypto to a lesser extent as well. PayPal, of course, has PayUSD as their stablecoin, and I can't wait to actually see, because everything is lining up very nicely, how they're going to deploy that across their ecosystem, but also be used by others. So PayPal leaps, that's in a play that I think is very undervalued. And so I don't mind holding out leaps. These are for $150 strike. The other ones that I own are for $90 strike for January 2027. Nubank is the other position that I ended up buying a little bit less than PayPal, but I ended up buying some leaps as well. Let me show you why on Nubank. I've talked about this elsewhere, a video entitled, Does Nubank Have a Real Problem? And a lot of what they are facing is macroeconomic stuff, geopolitical stuff. That's one of those concerns with holding a name outside of the United States. And this is my only holding other than Accelera, which is just a tiny, tiny position that's outside the United States. And in this case, you can see the currency conversion has just come under immense pressure. I mean, you can look at the 5-year trend. It looks, fairly similar. There are peaks and troughs. But over the last year, we see that it looks like that the real to USD has bottomed. I think there are some fundamental reasons on that. Even the DXY is inverting somewhat as well. Some of that has to do with United States policy. Some of that has to do with Brazil. But I think the choppy waters of Brazil have gotten a little bit smoother. And this is a play where they just execute. They're talking about potentially at some point in the future, not near term, expanding the United States. Tanner has a great video on that from the other night. Perhaps they're looking to go after the Latin American population here in the United States. But either way, they're doing quite well in Mexico and Colombia. They're launching a fuller suite of products there. I expect to see continued growth and continued outperformance. So I don't mind holding a $17 strike, which is a little bit higher than I usually have, but that's where I started building my position for January 2027. ENPH is another name. I didn't add a lot in these last two. ENPH, I did buy some shares. So some of that had to do with the executive orders that were signed last night. Now, there was a mention that does have some impact, not a massive impact, but does have some on ENPH regarding looking at and potentially repealing, and they did repeal some measures of the Inflation Reduction Act as well. But there was nothing directly targeting or even mentioning solar. I don't see the manufacturing credits going away for ENPH unless I've missed something. That was not in the executive orders, and Trump really likes bringing manufacturing in the United States. So I don't think that those will go away. The market sold off ENPH anyway, and it's, of course, near yet another low. It can go down further, but I said, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and own some shares. Now, the reason why I'm not buying leaps, at least not yet in ENPH, is it's hard to know. Solar is very cyclical, and it's hard to know exactly when that play will revert, when we'll change from being very bearish to very bullish. It will happen at some point, and the United States is very, very energy hungry. Certainly, drilling more, mining more for coal, uranium, those sort of things, building more nuclear plants are a part of the equation. But green energy, especially solar, is another. And I think that ENPH will do quite well, especially in those localities where at the state level or the local level, there are a lot of incentives to buying solar. As rates go down, that will help ENPH, although it looks like maybe not as many rate cuts as we were hoping previously. Only time will tell, but it's a quality company that I think will do well over the years. So just buying shares here until I get a better sense of when that might change, because you can hold shares forever. Robinhood is the last name that I bought. Up to today, or really late last night, Robinhood was the only company that I ended up purchasing all this year. So let me show you what the stock price is, and maybe I'll do a separate video at some point on this if this continues. But it seems like every day this year we're celebrating a new high, a new 52-week high on Robinhood. Not the all-time high yet. I don't know that we get that this year. We might. But even year to date, look at this, up 27.59%. I've talked about it elsewhere, but Robinhood, in my mind, on election night, is like Robinhood is a clear winner of this election. Everything else could be a little bit muddy. Tesla certainly was a winner too. But I said, you know what? I'm just going to be DCAing more into Robinhood, just shares. I think it's actually a little bit richly valued, just slightly rich. I don't mind DCAing in it. And I know if you look at PE, you're like, oh my goodness, how can you say 86 is a little bit rich? Well, that's trailing 12 months, and it's growing 100% year over year, something close to that when they post quarter four numbers. So just a small buy, actually my smallest today, but that's how I plan to play Robinhood, really until it gets to gross overvaluation, at which case I'll stop buying. But I don't think that we're there yet. So I don't mind buying, 5, 10, 15, 20 shares once or twice a week. Minimum I'll buy, 5 to 10, twice a week. So that's giving you the size of my buys. It's not massive, but that's kind of the way that I DCA, is either with a set amount or a set amount of shares. And so, Robinhood, that's the last one of those. So HIMS, GameStop, PayPal, Nubank, ENPH, Hood. I'm still a little over 5% cash, excluding swings, excluding some that I'm willing as well. And I don't mind having a little bit of cash, especially entering earnings season, because sometimes the market looks at a company and it's a great earnings and it just sells it off anyway to a cheap valuation. I want to have a little cash just in case one of these names or something else I'm watching lines up with that. So let me know what you think in the comments. Are there stocks that you're just buying hand over the fist? Are you being a little bit more cautious as we go into earnings and trying to get a bigger cash position? If you have questions or comments on any of the names that I shared, I'd love to hear it. As always, thank you for commenting, liking, and subscribing.